When you start going back through some of these old religious traditions, one thing becomes pretty obvious. A lot of words and ideas we use today have been around in one form or another for a very long time. Sometimes the meaning changes. Sometimes the language changes. Sometimes two different cultures are talking about similar ideas but approaching them from completely different directions. And that's what got me interested in this subject. I wasn't necessarily looking for some big connection. I was actually looking into the idea of salvation, where the language comes from, what people originally meant by it, and how the idea developed as these ancient cultures started coming into contact with one another. That eventually brought me to a word I've seen plenty of times without really paying attention to it: Soter. It's a Greek word usually translated as savior or deliverer. And once I started following that word backward, I realized it was a much bigger story behind it. Because Soter already had a history before it became a part of later theological language. Greeks used the title for different gods and eventually for rulers as well. One of the clearest examples is Ptolemy Soter, founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. So right away, you can see that a savior was not originally limited to one specific religious meaning. But then I started looking at the Hebrew side of the story. The Hebrew scriptures already had their own language for deliverance. The root yasha carries the idea of saving or rescuing. From that same family of words, you get Yeshua, meaning salvation or deliverance, and Moshiach, a deliverer. In the book of Judges, men like Othniel and Ehud are described as deliverers because they rescue Israel from oppression. Then in Isaiah 43, Yahweh is described as Israel's savior. So before Greek and Hebrew religious language ever starts blending together, both traditions already have their own ways of talking about being saved. That got me interested in the larger world Israel was living in, because Israel wasn't developing these ideas in isolation. They were surrounded by Canaanite religious systems, and the Bible spends a lot of time talking about them. That's where names like Baal, Asherah, Ashtart, and Anat come into picture. Baal is probably the most familiar, but Baal wasn't originally just the name of some evil figure. The word itself could mean something like Lord or Master, and then the Baal we usually hear about is closely associated with the storm god Hadad. One of the best places to understand that world is Ugarit, an ancient city discovered at modern Ras Shamara in Syria. The texts found there include what scholars call the Baal Cycle, usually cataloged as KTU 1.1 through KTU 1.6. Those tablets give us a much clearer picture of how Baal was understood. He's connected with storms, rain, and agricultural fertility, which makes sense when you think about people living there. If your crops depend on seasonal rain, then the god associated with those storms is going to make it a lot better. Then you have Asherah. This is where things get mixed up all the time because Asherah, Astarte, and Anat often get talked about like they're the same goddess. They're not. At Ugarit, Atharat, usually identified with Asherah, is a distinct figure. Astarte or Ashtaroth is another. Anat is another. Later, cultures could blend characteristics, but they weren't originally one goddess with three names. Asherah becomes especially interesting because the Hebrew Bible also uses Asherah for some kind of cult object associated with her worship. That's where the expression Asherah pole comes from in a lot of modern translations. Older translations sometimes use the word grove. Whatever the exact form was in every period, the text describes it as something that could be set up, cut down, removed, or burned. Deuteronomy 16:21 specifically warns against setting up an Asherah besides the altar of Yahweh. Then things get more complicated. In 2 Kings 21, Manasseh is accused of putting an Asherah image inside of the temple itself. That tells us something important. The religious world described in the Bible wasn't always cleanly divided between Israel religion over here and Canaanite religion over there. People mix practices, ideas cross boundaries, and the texts themselves admit that. Archaeology gives us another example. At Kuntillet Ajrud, the site in Sinai, inscriptions were described containing the phrase usually translated along the lines of Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah. Scholars still debate what Asherah means there. Some think it refers to the goddess. Others think it may refer to a cult object or something else associated with worship. Either way, it shows that religion on the ground could be messier than the later official version. Now, one of the things that originally caught my attention was the pole itself. We live in a culture where the pole is strongly associated with erotic entertainment. Ancient Asherah worship is often described in the larger context of fertility religion, so naturally, you start wondering whether that's some connection. As far as I can tell, there isn't any evidence that gives us a direct historical line from an Asherah object to the modern strip pole. But it's still an interesting resemblance, especially when you're looking at how symbols can survive, change, and lose their original meaning. The important thing is not confusing a resemblance with proof. The same thing applies with the sexual side of ancient religion. For years, people talked very confidently about temple prostitution throughout the ancient Near East. There are biblical terms that have been translated as cult prostitute or shrine prostitute, and there are passages that clearly place sexual or gendered activity within religious settings. But the idea that these temples were all operating organized sacred brothels is much more disputed than people realize. Historian Stephanie Lynn Boudin, for example, wrote a whole study called The Myth of Sacred Prostitution in Antiquity, challenging that practical picture. That doesn't mean sexuality and fertility had nothing to do with religion. It means we have to separate fertility symbolism from a specific claim about how an institution actually operated. Then you go get the darkest part of this material, children. The Hebrew text makes some serious accusations. Deuteronomy 12, Jeremiah 7, and 2 Kings 23 all contain condemnations connected with children and fire. Jeremiah connects it with Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom. 2 King connects it with Molech. Even Molech is debated. Some scholars treat Molech as a deity, while others have argued that the related ancient term may describe a type of offering. Then the trail moves west into the Phoenician world. Eventually, you get to Carthage. At the Carthaginian Topheth, archaeologists uncovers urns containing the cremated remains of very young children and animals. That evidence has been argued over for decades. Some scholars believe it confirms child sacrifice. Others argue that at least some of the children may have died naturally and have been buried according to a particular ritual. So again, the evidence is real, but the interpretation is still debated. And honestly, that's what makes this whole subject interesting to me, because the ancient world doesn't look nearly as neat once you actually start getting into it. People borrow from each other, religious practices overlap, some things were condemned officially while people continued doing them anyway. Then the Greek language began spreading through the same general region, and now we come back to Soter. The Greek world already knows that word. The Hebrew tradition already has its own language of deliverance. Then the Hebrew scriptures are translated into Greek in what we call the Septuagint. Now those older Hebrew ideas are being expressed through Greek words that already have their own history. That's the part I really want to stay with, because words don't arrive empty. When one culture's ideas are translated into another culture's language, the meaning can stay close to the original, but it can also pick up associations from the world that language comes from. So when we eventually get to the larger idea of salvation, I don't think the interesting question is simply who used the word first. That doesn't really tell us much. The better question is what different people meant when they talked about being delivered. How that meaning changed as cultures mixed, what the Hebrews meant by salvation, and what the Greeks heard when they heard Soter. And once those two worlds start speaking the same language, how much of each one ends up inside the meaning that comes later? That's what I want to understand. Not to attack anybody's beliefs, and not to prove that one religion stole from another. I'm interested in the history underneath the word, because by the time we inherit a concept like salvation, we're looking at the end of a very long conversation. And I want to know what that conversation sounded like at the beginning. And I think that's really the part worth sitting with. We use a word like salvation as if its meaning has always been fixed, but once you trace the language back, it gets more complicated. You've got Hebrew ideas of deliverance, Greek ideas of the Soter, and a much older religious world where people were constantly trying to understand who or what had the power to protect, provide, and preserve life. So the real question isn't just where the word came from, it's how the meaning changed. Because sometimes the word we think we understand is really the last chapter of a much older story. I'm DVS1. This is the Minority Report. And I'm not telling you what to believe, I'm showing you why I started asking the question.